The Imitation Nation podcast covers all things counterfeit, hosted by Shabir Imber-Safdar of the Partnership for Safe Medicines and Sven Bergman of Venture Global. All statements are their own and not the opinions of their employers.
Welcome to the first ever emergency podcast of Imitation Nation. I don't know if there are often emergencies in counterfeit detection and interdiction, but we're going to call this one an emergency podcast because at least I think as of 12:01 this morning, it was the end of de minimis for the United States for shipping from almost every other country except China and Hong Kong, which ended in May, right? De minimis was over for them in May. We talked about some trans-shipping schemes that we saw, people sending stuff through Vietnam or Thailand or Singapore. But now de minimis is over for everybody in the world for packages inbound to the U.S. How do you feel, Sven? Does it feel any different?
Nothing feels different for me yet. And it was funny when yesterday said like, we have to have an emergency podcast, and I was like, on what? And I think part of it because trade policy has been shifting so much over the last couple of months that you never knew what would stick, and this one stuck. And so, how do I feel about it? I think in the short term, there's going to be some turbulence. And it was funny. Because I was like, all right, before the emergency podcast, I'm going to put a couple of phone calls into folks I know in the shipping industry and in the kind of customs realm and all of that, and ask them, hey, is this really happening? What do you guys think? And I told you yesterday a couple of those. One of my higher ups at a commercial, when he picked up the phone, his first thing was like, tell me you're calling me to tell me good news that de minimis is still on. I'm like, no, it's still off. He's like, oh God. And then I asked him, how is it going to be? And he said, it's going to be a shit show. And so with that, I'm going to go long term. Long term, I think it's going to be brilliant. It's going to be brilliant because de minimis was abused. There's no reason to send 1.4 billion parcels loosely inspected without any tariffs, just swamping any inspection capacity any customs organization in the world could have through something that was intended that grandma can send tax-free gifts to their grandchildren. So I think long term that will be very good. I think it will be good for counterfeit. It'll be good all around. In the short term, it's gonna be really bumpy because as of this morning, I did a Google search this morning. As of this morning, over 30 countries, including Australia, Germany, Japan, UK, have suspended shipments into the US. So for the reason that they're like, the tariffs is not resolved, we don't understand how to collect it. The procedure wasn't written for it. We are basically flying this airplane as we're building it. And so I think as a result, while counterfeit will definitely be impacted in a good way, people might potentially be waiting for some of their parcels a little bit longer, or will be surprised when the mail carrier or the delivery person shows up and say, oh, by the way, you owe us $50.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that I'm paying attention to is noticing the difference between short term and long term. Short term, in my opinion, is almost, I wouldn't say it's irrelevant, but in terms of counterfeit interdiction, we're going to see a lower amount of products. I've been joking that this is sort of like the pandemic pause in the supply chain. We're going to have this like shock to the system where suddenly there's a lot fewer packages coming in, which I guess is great because the haystack's always been too big with de minimis to find counterfeits. But then there's also, and this is actually something I saw in a blog this morning from Steve Oxman, from the CTIPS program, the Trade Intellectual Property Protection Specialist program that I'm actually in that. And Steve Oxman's blog said that there's a real worry from brand holders that he works with that there'll be a shift from counterfeit interdiction to revenue collection, that resources will shift and IP protection will be deprioritized. So I think that's a really valid concern to have. And I think that was an observation that I haven't seen anyone else make. And I was like, oh, that's smart. but I think that the short term is in fact not that big a deal. I think the big thing that's going to happen, that is the big shift for everybody, is that a lot of people have built a way of life, be it a business or just their household, on cheap, tariff-free international shipping and logistics. What you might make something, you might actually be in logistics. You might be a person who enjoys, occasionally shopping online and buying things, or maybe you like doing that several times a day. I don't know, but every aspect of global trade is going to be touched by this because we are a very wealthy country. We buy a lot of things from the rest of the world where it's cheap, and we get a lot of counterfeits as a result of that. And we're going to see more paperwork and more taxes. I guess it's the equivalent in in counterfeit and trade. It's paperwork and taxes. In life, it's death and taxes. It's just going to affect a lot of people, right? Like I mentioned before, there's this cartoonist I follow in Australia who sends out about every quarter a little packet of drawings that she makes and pins and stickers. She's suspended that. She can't do that. She said, I got to wait. And ostensibly, I think she could get her stuff through, assuming that Australia does not suspend postal service, which 25 countries have done temporarily, because they don't have revenue collection mechanisms to deal with this. But eventually, I assume that she'll be able to send her stuff in. But it would be crazy if she actually had to pay, taxes on the 500 little envelopes she sends to Americans who support her cartooning career through Patreon. Like that seems a little
That's
crazy.
right. Yeah. No, and to your point, while this will be, I think, good for counterfeit overall because, as we discussed, it makes the haystack smaller, and so it's easier to find a needle in a smaller haystack. But um, it will be interesting to see, and I'm not fully sure yet what it is. The theory that the blogger brought up is good. The criminals that produce counterfeit are not just going to say, "Oh, shucks, well, guess we're done." That's not how they think. So their next piece is now, okay, fine, we use that. Where's the next weak point, right? How will they shift their business? Will it go back to cargo? Will it go back to um, sea cargo? Will they actually use some form of postal and just declare a tariff for an item that their intelligence tells them doesn't get inspected that much? So I call it socks, right? Which nobody would look for, but I pay the correct tariff for socks. And in there is actually counterfeit sneakers, right? And now to your point, yes, will customs, and that's a big question. That's a very good one, actually. Will customs change their enforcement priorities? And ICE has already obviously shifted their enforcement priorities a lot over the last couple of months. But would customs also now shift their enforcement heavier towards revenue collection? And that would be interesting. That also would be unfortunate. I hope it will be unlikely considering the hiring surge CBP and ICE are having right now. But it will be interesting to see where the criminals will go next.
Well, I actually, it's weird that this idea that there's going to be this huge interruption in global trade into the U.S. makes me feel a little bit like a country that's under sanctions, right? Countries under sanctions have difficulty getting products in. And it's possible that, we will feel the same way. I want to focus actually, though, on the positive here.
Yes.
Products coming into the U.S., shipments coming into the U.S. are going to need an entry, a formal entry. They're going to need paperwork that they've never needed before. For people involved in customs, for me, in the work I do trying to help people through the issue of trying to identify patterns of trade, of counterfeit medicine, and figure out what policies could be better, I could not have asked for a better change. Obviously, short-term pain for long-term gain here, but the idea that everyone shipping illegal, unapproved, or counterfeit medicine into the U.S. has to file paperwork, and that paperwork helps create a network of relationships and data that customs inspectors and the FDA's inspectors and private inspectors working for manufacturers can use to trace where this bad stuff is coming from into the U.S.
100%.
I could not have asked for a better thing. It's like you're going to ask the criminals suddenly start keeping all the receipts just in case you can get them.
100%. And Shabir, to your credit, you did ask for it when customs was asking, "Hey, we'd like to reform de minimis. What should we do?" Your day job, Partnership for Safe Medicines, did a very nice submission to exactly that Federal Register, saying all of those things. Hey, we need better inspections. We need better know your customers. And in there, we also argued that Type 86, that pilot in quotation marks program that had rocketed shipments from 400 million to 1.4 billion should just be revoked and dismantled. Well, Shabir, you got your wish, because yesterday, also while I'm on the phone with one of my folks trying to figure out, while I'm on the phone with him, he's like, "Oh my God." I'm like, "What?" He's like, "Type 86 just got revoked." I'm like, "You got to be kidding." So Customs said, and I'll send it to you, Shabir, and you can put it in the show notes, but Customs has said, in light of what de minimis is not there anymore, and the fact that Type 86 was kind of created to facilitate de minimis shipments, that pilot is now done. So Type 86, together with de minimis, yesterday saw its unseemly demise. And
let's actually help.
I could not be happier.
Let's actually help our readers through this. If you don't know what Type 86 is, let me do the definition and you can tell me if I'm right. It's when you take a bunch of de minimis packages, you put them on a pallet, you wrap them up in plastic, and you call them all a bulk de minimis.
That's correct. and then that bulk de minimis auto clears through customs, because you declared it de minimis the moment it loaded onto whatever it loaded onto, and then that entire pallet, unless pulled by customs for some targeting that they might have, which they don't have because there's no data on these packages, that entire shipment just goes through. And so, yes, that simple Type 86, which was launched by Customs as a pilot, and because it was launched as a pilot, it didn't require a formal rulemaking process. So nobody was able to make comments of saying, "This doesn't make sense." Lots of people have done it throughout the years, including us. I've said, "This doesn't make sense." That little pilot completely ballooned. And yes, it was insane. It took the entire one-to-one relationship of de minimis shipments away. It allowed companies like Shein and Temu to put pallets full of individual boxes less than worth than $800 onto a pallet, which now that pallet is worth hundreds of thousands. That pallet normally would need to go through a formal entry procedure, but it just got flagged through with Type 86. So good things happen in pairs, apparently, and de minimis and Type 86 both suspended, which is delightful. So
let's talk about what counterfeiters and everyone else might do to adapt to this, right? Steve Oxman in his blog on CTIPS speculated a little bit about this, and he said, and this is not an incredibly rare observation, but we've talked about this as well. If you're shipping into the U.S., odds are good that you're going to use some kind of free trade zone, or you're going to ship your product in and stage it stateside in a warehouse. So you'll ship, your 1,000 Apple chargers in and stage them in a warehouse, and then you'll ship them individually out because they've already passed customs. Counterfeiters will do that. Will want to do that too. However, it's a lot easier to find 1,000 counterfeit Apple chargers coming in as one shipment than it is to find a single one in a small package amongst 1 The same logistics techniques that the legitimate shippers are going to have to use are going to also make it easier to find counterfeit product.
Yeah. So to your point, again, the haystack will get smaller, so targeting should become better. Counterfeiters will, I think the way you could get around it, or the way they will try to probe the system. Yes, I think transshipments will be a part of it, but I still can't use transshipments for de minimis because de minimis is just banned for all countries. So I can't. There's not a loophole country I can send it into. Like, it's not we have de minimis from, I'll make it up, Dubai, right? So I can't find a country that's that's a low target. But what you probably would do is I would expect for the cargo environment, so this like smaller cargo in airplanes and larger sea cargo, to become more important again, because I can't really necessarily get it through the mail route anymore, because the moment I have a box that doesn't look like an envelope and I declare $0 value, I think customs will get very smart about it and just starts to pull things that that just that just look like they're not what they declare to be. So
Yeah.
misdeclaration will continue to pick up, but I think I honestly think this will have a very, very strong effect. Um, I don't know what the big immediate workaround for 1.4 billion parcels is.
Well, I have noticed that there's been a lot of talk about um, items less than $100 be, being passed through by the Postal Service. And so my guess is that we'll see abuse of that, of the Postal Service $100 or less exception. And we're probably going to continue to see counterfeiters just looking at this as a tax, right? You are selling I'm going to use a counterfeit medicine example. You're selling a GLP-1 injector pen that should cost $1,100 for $200. It's worth less than that because it's not actually the real drug inside it, but okay. And customs, you go to send it to the U.S. and customs like, it's going to have a duty of $80 or $125. And you go, okay, this person's going to pay that. I can just raise my price to $325 because they're still going to think it's a bargain because it's less than half of the original price. And I think that they'll just they can just look at it as a cost of doing business. I think, we're still going to see counterfeiters, but counterfeiters paying taxes will be sort of fascinating and novel. And we can still confiscate it and keep the duty.
So I think you're exactly right. The way counterfeit will go back to is kind of what you described is very much the old ways, right? So first of all, I lie on the manifest what's in it, because I wouldn't say it's the injector pen with what it is. I'll call it pencils, right? So I'll make it. I'll find an item that roughly is the same size, configuration, weight as what I'm shipping. I'm going to declare a value that will be a good value that customers will look at and say, fine, you're going to pay the tariff on it. And then you are going to put it in a cover load. You're going to put it into a container, and you're going to go back to the good old days of how counterfeit smuggling went. So I agree with you. I don't think the tariff itself will stop it. The fact that the super highway of packages, type 86, with the minimis declarations, that is shut down. So it will make it harder for counterfeiters. It'll make the pile smaller, and it allows for customs to target better. So I think it's a win-win all around. It will be interesting, and you and I will revisit this since we'll have this pod. In a year, we might come back and we're like, wow, they came up with something completely new that we didn't foresee, right? Yeah. And we'll see what the new smuggling and trafficking routes are.
Well, and I'm going to throw one more thing in there, and it's a promo as much for my day job of the Partnership for Safe Medicines, but we are calling on Congress to back up a request that FDA has. FDA has a request in the Congress to destroy unsafe products that would be in its purview, which is, food, drugs, and cosmetics.
Hallelujah.
That it would find. Now, the irony there, of course, is that right now they refuse an entry. It goes back to the shipper, or goes back to the counterfeiter, and the counterfeiters will send it back into the country, which is great. And I think we already have one example where that actually happened, which is kind of tragic, with a 15 kilogram shipment of tirzepatide. But if we can get FDA the power to destroy unsafe medical products when they're entering the country, they will have had to pay a duty, and then they'll get destroyed. We'll keep the duty and then charge them for the destruction. For someone who spent the last 20 years of their life fighting counterfeits, that just fills me with joy. complete joy.
No, 100%. 100%. Hey, as far as my Christmas wish list for that I have had for years is exactly that. I call it simplified seizure. It just is. You see something that you have deemed as counterfeit or dangerous, cut through all the paperwork. There should be a nice big shredder or burn bin right next to the customs officer. Throw it in, shred it, set it on fire, and move on, right? And because it gets in the way of seizure procedures. We've discussed this previously. If I, as a customs officer, sees a 40-foot container, that's the exact same paperwork as if I seize a small box. So that doesn't, for me personally, just thinking it through, that doesn't make sense. There should be a proportionality to it. And so you find a smaller amount, and I think the law you're looking at has a smaller amount in it. You see it, great. It's deemed illegal. It will be destroyed. And, as long as we warn folks when they ship stuff, if you ship stuff in that's illegal, it'll be destroyed. Fair game. So no, I'm all for that. By the way, I want to throw one more plug out there for you guys, for PSM, is the fishy freight report. If folks haven't seen that, go on PSM's website and look at the fishy freight report, because as I'm thinking through what we will see a lot of that. If I was a criminal right now and everything shipped back basically to a either formal or semi-formal entry, whatever it is, but something where I have to figure out how to work the custom systems, the A system, the other one. If I was a criminal right now, I would find the best unemployed or unhappily employed customs broker I can find. I would pay him a lot of money, and I would tell him, find me the loopholes in the system, because they exist. And you will find somebody that then, like in your example, ships in a scheduled narcotic, calls it antibiotics, puts a different code on it, and knows that it most likely won't get flagged for inspection. And so all of those loopholes is what they will be looking for. And your report is fantastic. So anybody of the listeners who hasn't looked at it, go to ShipUS website, savemedicines.org, download that report. It's fabulous.
All right. Thank you. We will put the Type 86 comments we submitted to CBP in the show notes. I'd forgotten we'd done that. It's been,
I know.
it's been 7 months. I feel like we've lived 4 years in trade policy this year, but it's only been 7 or 8 months.
That is true.
All right. Well, those are our predictions. We'll look forward to seeing which of them turns out to be true. And you can find us, as always, at Imitation Nation. The best place is LinkedIn. Follow us on LinkedIn. You can subscribe to our Podbean there. And I think that's it. Any last thoughts, Sven?
I can't wait to see what next week brings. Like, this has, to your point, like, this has not been a boring year at all. And so, there's a lot of movement right now on anything counterfeit, and there's a lot of determination by a lot of folks to maybe finally really make progress. So I'm excited to see what's next. And with that, I wish you a wonderful Labor Day holiday weekend.
Thank you. I'll read us out.
Do you want to read us out?
I will.
The Imitation Nation podcast is a production of Cause Stories and is the sole owner. Podcast production by Anna Rowland, management by Sarah Ember Safdar, and theme music written by Jonathan Boyle.